What was the mission of the summit and what did we accomplish? I think these sorts of summits are always great for people to be able to get together and discuss in a very meaningful way how we address the whole issue of mass atrocity crimes in the world and how we need to stop them. So I think it brought together people from different places and it brought together experts, and I think more brains good in terms of addressing some of these questions.
The responsibility to protect has taken a beating lately. What is the message you are sending out to the international community?
The responsibility to protect, I actually don't think it has taken a beating recently. I think there was a backlash after Libya. I think there was a huge and substantial debate after Libya about whether there was overstretch of the NATO mandate and so forth. But I think support for R2P at the United Nations is just about universal. And I think that's represented in a whole range of different ways, not least of all in the strong support that's shown each year in the interactive debate. I think now what we have at the United Nations is a situation where people discuss and debate the implementation of R2P in specific circumstances. But I think we've won the battle of ideas in terms of the idea that, yes, the international community does have a responsibility to react when people are facing the worst possible crimes, the crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, somewhere in the world, that should be done in particular ways. First of all, through the sovereign state involved and supporting that state and addressing its responsibility, but if needs be, of course, through the international community joining together to take coercive measures if regrettably necessary to make that happen.
How can member states support the United Nations in the R2P mission?
How can UN member states support R2P? Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't quite catch it.
How can member states support the United Nations in the R2P mission?
Well, I think there's a number of ways that UN member states can support R2P in the member state missions. I think one of the most obvious ways is there's a very excellent initiative called the Focal Points Initiative, where member states are joining together to build better preventive structures within their national governments, but also across regions and internationally. Slovenia, the government of Slovenia, the host of this wonderful conference, has just appointed a focal point. And I think those kinds of preventive measures are very, very important. We should never get to the point where we actually need coercive measures against a state or God forbid, military intervention against the state. If we build better preventive structures for early warning, then hopefully we can avoid that ever happening.
The United Nations says its hands are tied because of the lack of political will among key members of the UN Security Council. What is your reaction?
In terms of the issue of whether there's political will in the UN Security Council with regards to Syria, I think there's political will at the United Nations on the issue of Syria. If you look at the resolutions in the General Assembly, it's been clear in a number of cases that an overwhelming majority, more than 140 states, have voted for various resolutions condemning the crimes against humanity which continue to occur in Syria and calling for a united response. What we have in the Security Council, and let's be perfectly honest about it, is not a number of states, is 2 states who have voted against various attempts by that Security Council to hold the Assad regime accountable for its crimes against humanity. I think that, while we have the United Nations that we do with the veto structure that we have, that's something that we're going to have to live with. But I don't think that means the international community can't do anything. There are still many, many things the international community can do if it has political will. So, for example, I think something that's very, very important, which needs to be done, is that right now the international community can fund an increased number of human rights observers on the Syrian border in order to collect evidence with an eye towards future prosecution of all perpetrators, whether they be from the government or whether they be from allied militias or whether they be from rebel forces as well, who commit crimes against humanity and war crimes in Syria.
Please describe your understanding of the responsibility to protect and what it means as far as nations, their obligations, and what good is R2P without a law tied to enforce it.
It's a long, complicated question. Let's just assume I repeated it. Say it again. What's the...
Your understanding of the RTP, responsibility to protect, and what it means as far as nations, their obligations, and what good is RTP without a law to enforce it.
So it's actually 3 questions. So I'll start with the thankfully this is an edited video. I'll start with the first part of it.
I'll start.
What does R2P mean? I think, I've had the opportunity to work in Rwanda after the genocide and in some other countries that have faced mass atrocity crimes, East Timor and elsewhere. And I think the responsibility to protect was a solemn promise by the international community in 2005 that the world would never again stand by in a Rwanda situation, in a situation like Srebrenica in Bosnia, and do nothing when it knew everything about what was happening. I think that was, in many ways, the lowest moment in the United Nations history, and it was a result not of false action, but of complete and utter inaction. So I think the responsibility to protect is for UN member states, as I said, a solemn promise that they will try to make sure that that situation never happens again. I think there's been tremendous progress with the responsibility to protect in a very short period of time. Remembering it was only adopted at the UN World Summit in 2005. It's now 2012. I think we've seen it emerge as language. It's reframed the whole way that we think about mass atrocity crimes and how to prevent and how to stop mass atrocity crimes. But it hasn't been successful in all cases, particularly in those very contentious cases where it's not a matter of prevention or even of helping a state to deal with the situation, but where a state is clearly unwilling and unable to stop the crimes against humanity that is happening in its country. So I think the responsibility to protect has helped frame our responses, and that is a huge shift from the situation of the 1990s. What was the second part of that?
Well, what it means as far as nations, their obligations, and what good it is without a law to enforce it.
In terms of what good R2P is without a law to enforce it, I don't think the world has a lack of laws around mass atrocity crimes or genocide. We've had a genocide convention since 1948, but that genocide convention proved almost useless when genocide took place in the heart of Africa and right here in the heart of Europe as well, not far from where we're sitting right now. What was missing was political will. So I don't think it's a question of law and the need for more laws and greater proliferation of laws. I think the laws are there. I think what we need is to strengthen the politics of non-indifference and to strengthen the political will that's necessary to mobilize the international community when necessary to get involved in these issues.
What do you think is required to guard against the situation in Syria spreading to the entire Middle East?
Yeah, look, in terms of the issue of the violence spreading in the Middle East, I think this is a real and serious concern. And I think this is one of the things that makes the vetoes that were exercised on 3 occasions in the UN Security Council all the more disappointing and I would say disgraceful on behalf of the countries that made those votes. I think there was a chance in Syria, if you go back a year or so from ago, to actually affect the situation in a positive way and to potentially halt the violence. The violence was very asymmetrical. It was by the government against unarmed people. There was no armed rebellion to speak of at that stage. And there were opportunities for the international community to make a real and substantial difference. I think that opportunity was lost, and it was lost in part through the vetoes that were exercised on the Security Council. The situation now is completely changed. I think we have this civil war. It's no longer the situation that it was before. We have a situation where violence is spilling across Syria's borders into Lebanon and into Turkey. destabilizing the entire region, where all sides in this conflict are now dedicated to a military solution to that conflict. And I think that is the greatest tragedy that you could have. In terms of what will happen next, I think none of us know. I mean, there are many people who are talking about worst case scenarios in terms of further destabilization in Lebanon, or of Syria turning into a Lebanon-like situation if you go back to the civil war that took place previously. I think what's absolutely clear is that this is a terrible example of a failure on behalf of the international community to take timely and decisive action when it was needed.
So, if I'm correct, can I interpret that to mean that the burden for the situation is more in the hands of the international community than it is in the hands of the Syrians?
No, I think the Syrians have to sort their own problems out, but of course the international community has to play an important role in assisting the Syrian people and assisting people in the region in terms of finding a solution to the situation there. And I think the longest term scheme of things, there has to be accountability for crimes that have taken place, regardless of who the perpetrators are.